Hey everybody, I'm Aaryn Lang. Welcome to
We gonna take it, 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 gonna take it to the top. I'm gonna take it to the top.
Hello everybody. Welcome to Miss Lang's Present. I'm Aaryn Lang. Today I'm joined by my dear friend Allen Kwabena, and we're going to be talking about what wealthy white people should be doing in this time. So, without further ado, Alan, hello my love.
Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's happening?
Would you like to tell the people what you do and why you are the voice we should be listening to right now?
Yeah,
Or
Allen Kwabena Frimpong here. I'm with Ad Astra Collective. We are a consulting collective based here on the East Coast. We also got work out in LA. But I am a resource mobilizer, working with movements. I also work in philanthropy. And I support groups, organizations, individuals really explore and figure out ways that they are being resourceful, whether that's with their dollars, whether that's with their capacity, their skill sets, their talents, to be able to make change happen in their local communities. And I've been doing that work for well over 12 years at this point. Um, and working in all different sectors and ways of life, lived experiences, and what it means to practice philanthropy. And to me, practicing philanthropy, the love of humanity, is about being in solidarity with one another. And in order to do that, we have to be able to understand each other's lived experiences across race, class, gender, and to really interrogate those things so that we can truly show up authentically and build a kind of power amongst us that will liberate us from things like white supremacy, racism, sexism, patriarchy, homophobia, and all of the other ways that we are oppressed in this country and also globally.
I've been seeing a lot of talk about, this time during Corona and with these uprisings happening all over the globe, that this time feels different. I'm not fully convinced just yet that this time is any different, but I do think something is happening. I'm feeling some type of an energy in the world that I am really curious to see how we harness that energy and move forward with it. How do you feel like this time is different than, uprisings of the past maybe 10 years? Or do you feel this time is different at all?
I think what has made it different over the past 10 years is the evolution of technology. It just means there's faster ways to be connected and get connected and to respond to things. And I think we saw that, with moments like the Arab Spring. We saw that in moments in Spain where they literally took over their local politics and their country's politics in terms of their government and how they govern. And we saw that with Occupy Wall Street and as well. We saw that with BLM. So I think with Black Lives Matter. So I think I think what feels different now, I just think is that the amplification of attention that these ongoing issues in our country have had for quite some time. What to me doesn't feel different is that our people are still being lynched, maimed, brutalized. Like that actually is a continuation of the legacy of this country. And so to me, that's not new. To me, it's just a really bad remix. Like no Diddy. It's just it is what it is. To me, that does not feel different at all. I actually think it's just a really bad remix in a time where we're in a pandemic, and I don't think this is new either. We should look to the work that was happening when there was the yellow fever, or the Spanish flu. and you will see the level of work that, quite frankly, Black people have always done in this country, such as the Free African Society, to organize people in their local communities in Philly at a time where they were also doing the work of making sure that enslaved people were set free. They were literally bartering, exchanging, practicing mutual aid, pooling their funding and resources together in a system that never saw them fully as human. And I believe that we're still dealing with that right now by virtue of our criminal justice system and by virtue of the fact that we still have a state of policing that has its infancy also in slavery and in the inception of capitalism in this country. So, like, long and short, this is just a really bad remix.
Yeah, it's definitely feeling that way for me too. I see a bunch of people and brands, trying to jump onto the bandwagon and, affirm their care for Black lives. I've also seen a bunch of people, not demanding, but requesting education, and also being welcomed, to 2020 and understanding that racism is, still very much a part of this nation. Why do you think it takes Black people literally being murdered on camera for white people to admit that racism is still alive and well? Like, what is that? Why do you think white people even need to see that visual?
I mean, the word that I used earlier was lynching. I
Mm.
think if you think about a public lynching, this is no different. So I think this goes back to the remix piece, you know? And also, we have to understand part of slavery as the bedrock of our economic system, that Black bodies uh, were literally being used as a commodity. A lot of the work that I know of Shayna Griffin down in New Orleans and the work that she has around displaced and the history of slavery in New Orleans, literally buy a slave at the hotel or at the school. I mean, the spectacle of how white supremacy culture and capitalism work is that we are still living with that legacy around how we have a relationship to wealth and to money in this country. And so I think for many people who ascribe and enable and collude and accommodate that kind of behavior, for many people, the public display of a lynching is no different than the public display of watching a police officer choking, shooting at, tasering, brutalizing Black and brown bodies. And when it becomes that outlier that it's somebody else, whether you're Asian or Jewish or whatever, all of those folks are literally collateral damage to a system that pretty much says not only does your life not matter, but all your life is and our legacy is a commodity. So to watch people literally being killed and brutalized really sends an implicit message that, oh, isn't that so unfortunate? Oh, isn't this such a disappointing circumstance? Oh, this makes me sad. And what we're really saying, what we don't realize we're actually really saying behind that is, oh, wow, let me give my money, let me put in my time, let me do something, or let me just watch the spectacle happen, because we're not actually thinking about the relationships we have to people who have had a legacy of building this country and how we are actually being in solidarity together. We would rather wait until we're in crisis, until there's a pandemic and the pandemic is not enough, and we would rather wait until masses of people in both conditions are brutalized in multiple different ways before we even think to put any kind of resources out of our pocket. And even then, as we're seeing right now, as the playbook is playing out, it's still not enough. And I think that speaks to the spiritual, emotional, and cultural conditions in which our country is finding ourselves in. That, to your question and to your own point, not much has changed, but we keep remixing the same conditions we're in. So that's the way I see it. It's nothing more than another iteration of a public lynching to me. Like that's my perspective on it. And people are literally being lynched right now. We just had what in the past week or so, 3 to 4 cases of people who are found hanging from trees or were finding nooses.
Apparent
And
suicides,
yeah,
according to the police. Because
so
Black
like
people are actually taking ropes and stringing themselves from trees and hanging themselves. Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. I feel like people saw Black people pissed off in the street. I think people saw angry Black people and burning buildings. And to me, I think that has struck fear in the white community, especially the white money community, that once they burned down the city, they were going to come to the suburbs and burn down our houses. So, do you think that this kind of outpouring of care, and even in some cases this outpouring of resources, is actually a fear response, and not one that is grounded in any type of transformation or any belief in solidarity?
I think trauma response naturally brings up fear. It's going to bring up fear, So I don't expect anything different. Do I think that there are individuals who are practicing what it looks like to be in solidarity? Absolutely. But I think en masse in this country, the majority of what we're seeing is a reactionary response. So thank you, like, for bringing that up in connection to your last question. I think that is what is driving people. I think people are still protecting their class interest, and so they don't even know what it looks like in their life to be in solidarity with other people who think differently than them, who have a different worldview than them, that look different from them, that have total different life experiences, and nor are they in an understanding around how their ancestors, their legacy, or any of their previous history has anything to do with what they have right now. People think, oh, well, I worked hard. Well, from a meritocracy standpoint, you may think that, but you also have to recognize the history and the displacement and the removal of indigenous folks of this land and the indigenous folks that you stole from another land called Africa, right? That allows you to even have what you have, right? So all of that matters. So it's definitely a real fear. White supremacy is not only just a trauma response, but it's a whole fucking system.
Oh, you said there are individuals who are practicing solidarity. Could you tell us, what does solidarity look like for moneyed white people in this struggle for Black liberation?
From my experience in working with donors who are part of an organization called Resource Generation, you can Google them. Really powerful group of young people who are doing cross race, cross class work around privilege and power, around white privilege and the power that they have, around their inheritance of wealth or the wealth that they've come into, and understanding that the accumulation of their wealth is really what is creating class divisions in our society. It's what's creating the poverty that has been inextricably linked to many Black and brown communities, and even for the rural white communities that are in these areas that are so captivated by the conservative amplification of the politics of the Tea Party and of the alt-right and all these people, that organizations such as this are doing the political education work necessary to understand their relationship to money, to understand their inheritances and how their families have come into them, and how to facilitate conversations with their families. And so I think the most important thing for those folks who are doing that work, that I think maybe is a shortcut framework and understanding the importance of that doing that work is that one, their way of being, like who they are in the world, and their families and the collective condition that I was talking about. If your way of being is one of dominance, control, manipulation, transaction, trying to get something from somebody in order to feel better, trying to think that if I give you something, you'll like me, or people pleasing. Like we're not asking for that kind of way of being, and nor are we requesting it. Like it's a choice. And I think that in a capitalist society, we're what folks are really looking for is for you to be human, for you to be compassionate, for you to be loving. And how do you show up like that with your own folks? And how do you do that in people who you're in community with? And how do you do that with people who you're not in community with? And I think that becomes a real life question because it speaks to the kind of trauma cycle that our country is in. To me, white supremacy, like I said, is not only a trauma response, but it's a whole system of victimhood. It's a whole system of perpetrators, and it's a whole system of saviors. And as long as we continue to maintain those roles in this system, like this system will continue to perpetuate itself. So I think in wealthy, moneyed white folks, the more that you maintain ways of being that keep you in victimhood, that keep you in perpetration of being saviors, none of this is going to change, and we'll keep remixing this cycle. So I think that's the first piece. The second piece, bring that being into your doing, into your actions around how you are in relationship to you, how you're in relationship to your families, how you're in relationship to your communities. If we're going to have a serious conversation about how we are going to do the work of all availing ourselves of white supremacy, culture, and capitalism. Lastly, is what do we want to create? What's the world that we want to create as a result of who we are and what we are doing? And I think the indigenous people of this country really have all those lessons, but we can't really be with them unless we're able to atone for all of the continuous harms, even today, that we continue to enact. Reparations is not just an act to atone for the past. Reparations is about now, because we're doing it now. Even as we speak, people are participating in wage theft and in ways that we're extracting people's labor, extracting resources that is not in right relationship to people, land, or even our own spiritual indigenous ways of being. So I think, to me, that's like my short end, but it's also a plug for people like Resource Generation who are cultivating white, moneyed, wealthy people who are actively figuring out ways and actively thinking about ways to give their money in ways that is in right relationship to movements that are about changing and liberating us and practicing abolition and harm reduction in their lives so that the systems themselves can fall and crumble and tumble down.
What do you need the field of philanthropy to know about this time? What do you need philanthropy to do?
Depends on which philanthropy you're talking about. So maybe I'll cut it in segments. If I were to be totally honest with you, these private corporate foundations should all be sunsetting right now. If I were to be honest, they should give away all their money. That's what you should do. Because all of your money, all of your wealth is accrued from, again, the legacy of slavery and capitalism. That isn't a debate. That's not an opinion. That's just facts. You can go read all the tax codes, Google 501c3, look at the tax codes. Justice Funders, that's another organization. They have a wonderful timeline that has chronicled the ways that United States policy has really created conditions for wealthy people in this country. So for private entities, if we were to reckon and have a serious conversation, the fact of the matter is private foundations shouldn't exist. They should be made obsolete, aka abolish them, and localize them through community control. Our community foundations our public foundations should be vehicles that should be participatory, that support communities in building up the muscle to create local governance so that people in their community actually know what it means beyond voting, what it means to work together to make decisions. And to me, that's what's important. So I think private foundations need to end. They need to give their money up. That money needs to be localized and it needs to be under community control. And those national entities that are public foundations should be working in that same light too. And there are organizations like Resist. Resist was one of the founders is Noam Chomsky, theorist, white guy, but like the work that they've standed on for many, many of years is in alignment with the kind of philanthropy we want to see. And so those are the things that people need to do. Public foundations, community foundations, you need to continue doing that work, and we need to be able to up the ante in terms of the giving to people locally who really need the resources to be able to build the new infrastructure that we need for the kind of new world that we want. And private foundations, I know folks don't want to hear this, but it's your time up. Your time is up. Like it's past up. Sunset. Atlantic Philanthropies is a private. They're sunsetting. It's just perpetual wealth building.
Oh, wow.
And what we need is perpetual cultural building. We need a country of interdependence. We're already interdependent. We just need to acknowledge it and release ourselves from this false idea that, oh, I'm self-made, I did it on my own. It's a lie. It's just a lie of capitalism and white supremacy again.
So to wrap up, I want you to say what is one simple instruction or message for white America during this time?
You got to choose to reckon with yourself right now. You have to reckon with yourself and how you have been complicit with the conditions that have always led to the killing, the beating, the shootings, the layoffs, the firings, all of that. Because all of those things go back to one thing. And it goes back to the relationship that white people have had with this country since its inception. So I think it's time for the reckoning. That's like the statement, And if you want to learn more in ways that you can give strategically and be able to be in that relationship, I have a website called oldmoneynewsystem.net that you can go to for all of the resources, some of which I've cited today. But that's the simple thing. It's your time of reckoning, and that should be your good news. That should be your great news. It's actually not.
You should be happy about that. And then finally, what do you have to say to Black people right now?
I also think it's a time of reckoning. It's always has been, but I think this kind of reckoning is around that we're always worthy. We don't have to prove anything to anybody. We don't have to, perform for anybody. We don't have to force ourselves into producing things for anybody. All we got to do is do the thing that our ancestors have always done. And that is just believing that we are worthy, believing that we are sufficient, that we're enough. And we don't have to prove to anybody that our lives matter. They already do. They already matter. And so for us, what does it look like for us to build in community together so that we can cooperate ourselves in such a fashion that we can govern ourselves. We can make decisions among ourselves. We can build and decide how we want to use resources together so we can thrive. And so I think the question for us in our reckoning is, what does it look like to survive, to thrive? What does it look like to thrive and not survive? And not survive under the imagery of white supremacy, under the ideas, the sick ideas of white supremacy. What does it just look like for us to believe in our sufficiency to thrive? And I think that's been an ongoing conversation, but it's one that I think we should even deepen ourselves in right now.
And I know that was supposed to be my last question, but of course, one popped up.
Come on, let's keep it going.
Okay. We've seen two Black trans women be murdered in the midst of these uprisings. We also saw a young Black trans woman attacked by a mob of fellow Black people at a store. I want to say a week into the uprising.
Right.
What do you think it would take, and is it even worth wondering what it would take for the Black cis community to meaningfully work with the Black trans community in this time of reckoning?
What I'm going to respond to is you said this word wonder. I don't think because of all that I said earlier about white supremacy and capitalism, I'm going to say we can't afford to wonder. We can't afford to wonder what we need to do
Mhm.
and what our responsibility is to do and who to be with our trans brothers and sisters and also gender non-conforming folks. We can't afford to. And I believe that we need to be able to do our own work to be able to recognize that before we were even brought here on these slave ships, that gender, just like race, is a construction. And so when I think about my own people who are from Ghana and the Akan people, they have this symbol that's called Jinyame, which in post-colonial terms it means the omnipotence of God. But if we just think about balance of what we would say on our left hand is feminine energy and masculine energy, and we clasp them together, that they create balance in the world. So it's kind of similar to the yin and the yang. And I think that we need to do the work of healing from what slavery has done to us when we were separated in the slave dungeons by gender, and the ways that our women were raped by their masters and their slave catchers and holders. I think a lot of that healing work is what we need to do to transition our relationship and transform our relationship. And you keep hearing me using transition, transform.
Come
There's
on,
something about the
Alan.
politics of being trans that we haven't really been with yet. And we all really need to learn and embody what it means to hold a trans politic in our lives. We, as a black people, are always in transition. And once we tap into that, we will realize that we don't have to hold on to European notions of femininity and masculinity and gender. We will do that so that we won't feel so much the hatred that we have for ourselves and how it gets enacted on black women, on black trans women, on trans people, on gender nonconforming people, on queer people, on lesbians. On gay people. We will stop doing that because we will realize that all of that is what we're holding. What we're holding is actually white people's trauma, the legacy of the trauma that has separated us. And I feel like if we can't afford to wonder about that, we need to be in that zone now, and we need to be in relationships to our folks, just like we are in relationship together. And the organizations and the people who are actively doing that work, it's great work, and we have to do that work too in relationship to you, and we have to do it amongst us ourselves as well.
I think that's it, Alan. I got you to preach a whole, a whole 20, 30 minutes. And I hope those of you watching this have got something that you can take into your communities. And I hope this is something that sparks dialogue and hopefully action in every single one of you. Alan, I love you so much. Thank you for coming and speaking your truth. As always, not your truth, the truth. Um, and I'm so excited to share you with the world. So that's all. That's all she wrote, honey.
All right.